Welcome, guys, to How the Frack We Got Here, a show that takes the news and events of the week and try to make sense out of it all. I'm your host, the most Will Buchanan, and on this show, we simply are all about the facts. There are plenty of news stations out there that simply want to do anything short but inform you. Here at How the Frack We Got Here, that's all we believe in. We go up to the lefts, we go up to the rights, we go up to the middle of independence, we go after all sides because there's more than one side of a story to everything. And you need to know it all in order to actually formulate your own opinion. And that's what we try to do here at How the Frack We Got Here. Thanks for listening, and hold on. It's going to be fun.
All right, guys. Today's date, December the 6th, 2023, and this is How the Frack We Got Here. I'm your host, the most Will Buchanan, How the Frack We Got Here. We do take the events of the week and try to make sense of it all. Before we get started, guys, let you know that, we are a news podcast. We do try to get our news sources from the most reputable sites that actually have award-winning journalism. We do not do sensational news like Fox News or Newsmax or whatever left or extreme right that you may get your news from or hear from your crazy uncle. That being said, we do try to maintain our language, but sometimes words definitely do fly. And of course, there may be things tonight that might be shown that might be too intense for younger viewers, so viewer discretion is advised. Aside from that, welcome. So, how do we really start this? Well, I actually want to sit there and say I want to start with something that, again, was on my bingo card. Again, I did not see Republicans doing, and, well, not surprised about how this person took his very bad news from being expelled from Congress.
This is an ABC News special report.
Good morning, I'm Terry Moran. We are coming on the air for a historic moment unfolding on Capitol Hill. New York Republican Congressman George Santos has just been expelled from Congress. He is only the sixth person in American history to be voted out of the House of Representatives. The results of the bipartisan vote really weren't that close. A two-thirds majority of the members present was needed, so the House is now made up of 221 Republicans and 213 Democrats. The final vote, 311 voting to expel Santos, 114 voting against it, and two members voting present. This vote narrows the already small majority held by Republicans in the House of Representatives. Prior to the vote, Speaker of the House Mike Johnson told Republican members to vote their conscience, saying he himself would not be voting to expel George Santos. But many Republicans, especially the New York delegation, decided they have had enough. Santos, who was inside the House chamber at the time of the vote, he's been a lightning rod for controversy since before he was even sworn into office. His ousting follows the release of a blistering report from the House Ethics Committee, which accused him of stealing money from his campaign for personal use, including paying for rent, for designer clothes, for Botox, and even for an adult website. The ethics panel spent months interviewing 40 witnesses, pouring over 172,000 pages of documents to reach that conclusion. Santos has also been indicted by a federal grand jury. He's pled not guilty to 23 federal counts, including fraud and identity theft. Throughout it all, he has been defiant, insisting that he would force this vote. Now he's lost it. So let's get right to ABC senior congressional correspondent Rachel Scott. Rachel, this is a historical moment. George Santos, the first person expelled from Congress who was not either a traitor to the country. Three were Confederates who had been expelled previously or been convicted of crimes. He's been convicted of nothing, but the House decided he'd had enough.
Terry, we just watched history unfold in the House today. Congressman George Santos has officially been expelled from Congress, making him the sixth member of the House of Representatives to be forced out, the very first Republican member of the House to be forced out of Congress. This momentum has been growing for months, and this could not have happened today without the support of Republicans. In the end, you had more than 100 Republicans say that they support this push to expel Congressman George Santos from the House. From the moment that he walked through the doors here on Capitol Hill, he has been defiant. He's been accused of lying about his professional resume and his background. Then he pleaded not guilty to those 23 federal charges, including identity theft, unemployment fraud, and wire fraud. But it really was this latest report from the House Ethics Committee, which was blistering, accusing him of blatantly stealing from his campaign, using that money to fund trips to Atlantic City, even on Botox designer goods, that really caused this momentum to start to grow, this push from Republicans to say he needs to be forced out. And so now here you have it. Here we are. They expressed some concerns about the precedent that this would set. That's why you saw every single member of House leadership, including the new Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, reject this push to expel Congressman George Santos. But this is effective immediately. As of right now, Congressman George Santos is no longer a member of Congress, Terry.
It really is a remarkable moment and a precedent, as you say. But for practical purposes now, the House Republican majority has been narrowed in the House of Representatives, already very slim. It's now 221 to 213. What happens next now that the 3rd district, a congressional district of New York, doesn't have a member of Congress? What happens next?
Yes, and Terry, Republicans were worried about losing a lot of their majority here, too. They went from a 4-seat edge now to a 3-seat edge. That is going to make things more complicated with pushing through their own priorities in the House chamber. And so, as I mentioned, this is now effective immediately. So in the next 7 to 10 days, we will see the governor of New York, Kathy Hochul, call for a special election. The special election would then have to happen in the next 70 to 80 days after it is called. But one thing that is important to note here, there is no guarantee that a Republican can hang on to that district. That is a district that President Biden won. It's a district that Congressman George Santos flipped as a Republican, and it will be very tough for Republicans to keep that seat, Terry.
So much at stake, the precedent and the politics.
In so many ways, you wouldn't be wrong. I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised, number one, and you're probably wondering, you feel like you're probably not surprised either. I'm not saying that George Santos was expelled from Congress. Because for a second, I didn't think it was going to happen. I didn't think the Republicans had it in them. I did not think for 1 second that the 221 majority in the House would vote to get rid of George Santos. All Democrats, I can see that coming. But all 220 Republicans, even though there was a good number that decided to not remove him. And I was just curious because they set a certain number that needs to be a certain number that had voted. But House Speaker Mike Johnson did not vote. But again, going back to the video, I think it was like 104 voted to not remove George Santos. Let's think about this for a second, folks. And if I was listening, and if I was a conservative, and let's just say I would be more concerned about the 104 that didn't vote to remove this man. Keep in mind, George Santos is basically Donald Trump if Donald Trump was younger and discovered Botox and OnlyFans earlier in life. A lot on his resume, a lot about the campaign funds he was using. Pretty much nothing outside of what this man has said has actually been verified true. It's actually been the latter. And even more so that now he's now filing complaints with the ethics committee over certain congressmen. George Santos is basically what happens when you put figures like Trump on a pedestal. These guys come out the woodwork. And again, Santos has nothing to stand on. I'm glad he's removed. That does show that there are some Republicans that actually are capable of doing the right thing, which is removing a politician that had no business being there. But again, 104 individuals out there still decided that this man should still be in office, which I have been saying on this podcast the entire doggone time. It is not the conservatives and the GOP could care less about their voters. It was about retaining power. And yes, their majority may have slipped just a little bit, but it's still 200 and 222 people. I should say 221 people now versus 213. So their majority may have been reduced by 1 seat for now, because as the journalists have said, a special election will be held to where Mr. Santos' seat will be filled. It could be filled by a Republican. It could be filled by a Democrat. But even if so, the Democrats did gain another seat. The Republicans still have an overwhelming majority in the House. That being said, however, there is no, again, I'm stuck on the fact that we had to go to such lengths. Don't get me wrong, there are some people that believe in due process, especially those that did not want to vote against Santos because they wanted the truth to come out. The ethics report did come out, confirmed everything that we're saying about George Santos. And even then, it should be like, well, you guys got exactly what you wanted. You wanted the report. You wanted to see exactly if he was guilty or not. Now you have the smoking gun. Democrats were quick to move forward with a measure to move George Santos, but at the same time, we're not looking at the fact of how slow Republicans were moving to say, well, I mean, who hasn't made mistakes? And that's the thing about Republicans. And again, this whole entire time since they've been acting, since they've been in Congress, since they've been in power, since the beginning of this year, I have questioned why people still vote conservative, and you're shooting your own selves in the foot. Because right now, conservatives have done nothing more than dismay, distract, and try to push through things that don't make any sense. Don't believe me? The man who has only been the House Speaker for less than a few weeks, Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, has decided to sit there and say, for those would-be terrorists that played along in the January 6th attempted coup, because it was more than a riot, it was an attempted coup. But he is saying for those individuals in the January 6th riots, he is asking for their identities to be blurred out in video. You cannot make this up.
Some of the faces of persons who participated in the events of that day, because we don't want them to be retaliated against and to be charged by the DOJ.
Is there any legal reason to blur their faces? Forget the DOJ part of it for 1 second. I mean, they're criminals.
Yeah, there's no legal justification to blur the faces whatsoever. To the contrary, it would get in DOJ's way to do that. Now, they tried to backtrack and say we're worried about private retaliation. That's nonsensical. I don't even know what they're talking about here. But to be clear, what Mike Johnson said is, as Speaker of the House, I'm going to blur these people's faces so they cannot be identified and prosecuted, even though they're on video at the scene of a crime. This would be, by analogy, what if Mike Johnson had surveillance video privately held of a bank robbery and said, before I release this to the public, we need to redact out the faces of some of the participants because I wouldn't want them retaliated against. What Mike Johnson is calling retaliation, I think DOJ would call identification and prosecution.
And he's right. Not to cut him off, identification and prosecution. It amazes me that, again, these are the videos talking about the U.S. Capitol attack that happened on January 6th. Now, 2 years ago now. Mike Johnson wants the identities blurred out. Well, because of retaliation, there hasn't been one case of so-called retaliation. There hasn't been one case of so-called fear for my life for these would-be who consider themselves patriots. They're really domestic terrorists. But there's not a case of that where one of them has been prosecuted for their views. Some of them may have lost jobs. Some of them may have lost freedom because they were given jail time because they were convicted in cases that were brought forward by DOJ. But again, Mike Johnson and his theory of retaliation. See, here's the thing: it can't be retaliation, but like the journalist said, it's identification, because they can identify you being there on the 6th, where you decide to listen to President Cheeto at the time, and you decide you wanted to go down to the Senate. And you decided you wanted to go to the U.S. Capitol and stop the Senate from recording delegation votes to actually go ahead and codify, at the time, President-elect Biden's presidency win. The fact that you did it, the fact that you're on camera, the fact that you attacked Capitol police officers, that you broke into a government facility, that you may or may not have caused personal damage, the fact that you've done all these things and you have yet to be identified. And now you have the Speaker of the House who is trying to sit there and say, well, we need to blur them out for retaliation. No, because there's not an American citizen going, you decide to ride on January 6th. We own your ass. We own your ass because you need to be identified, that you need to be held accountable, that your actions have consequences. If anything, that's what you should be worried about. But again, there's not a record of a January 6th domestic terrorist that had anything else happen to them except they got identified. And at that point, your former job may have decided to release you, or if you were in business, your business may have suffered. But again, that's consequences to your actions. That in itself is not a warring cry for protection against whatever invisible mob is after you. So yes, House Speaker Mike Johnson, this is a reach, and thank goodness this is not getting taken seriously. But here's the scary part. It almost did. because there's still people in those riots that have yet to be identified. The Department of Justice is still searching for. So again, if they are identified, cool, they should be. But at the same time, masking their identity makes it harder for them to face accountability for their actions. Again, it always comes back to freedom of speech. Well, they were just exercising their freedom of speech. You can exercise your freedom of speech all you want to. What you're looking for is freedom of absolution from accountability. That's something you're not going to get. Whatever you decide to say in life, you do have to answer for it. That's the way it is. I can sit here and say all the time about speaking about a certain race. I use this analogy. Napkins can say the N-word all they want to, but I guarantee what would happen if you said it among others. See, saying it in private is a little bit different, but if you say it out loud where other people can get to you, consequences are different. Again, not surprised about this, but then I'm not surprised by the Republicans because this is only just on top of the BS that they've done since they've been in Congress. But again, House Speaker already messing up. Bravo. Here's one thing, guys, I do want you to pay attention to because you really should. And this case here was a Supreme Court case, as the title they had for CNN, Supreme Court case that could make it hard for Congress to tax the rich. They are talking about the court case of Moore versus the United States. Now, here's the thing. Moore versus the United States is basically going over the tax codes that have been put in place to basically make the rich, basically for the rich to pay their fair share. What actually happens is it's pretty much for the existing tax code. So there's multiple provisions that have hit Americans, especially those of the higher I can afford to take a hit variety. Well, that pretty much was a measure. And as you can see there, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. Again, which for all those that are wondering, this was the Republicans. They passed in 2017. It created a one-time transition tax levied on shareholders on undistributed profits accrued between 1986 and by the end of 2017 by certain foreign corporations that are majority owned by Americans. That's just a part of it. Now, here's the thing. Long story short, this is basically a tax on overseas investments, which again is a widely open debate. But it's amazing to me that because of this, that you've had those again with the Moore versus United States bring it forward that it was unconstitutional to tax said certain foreign investments. Now, you're probably wondering, what does this mean? Well, this is a landmark case that the Supreme Court's going to be listening to because their decision could impact the way Congress taxes the rich. It could. And you also have to remember, guys, we are dealing with a conservative leaning Supreme Court, which means that they could rule in favor of Moore. And that again would be dangerous because if you thought taxing the rich was hard now, it is going to be completely difficult if this goes through. Because everybody's remember when Biden tried to do a billionaire income tax, pretty much a tax on those whose income is worth over 100 million, would have had a tax rate of at least 25%. Keep in mind, these are people whose worth is over 100 million. Taxing them 25% every year is literally pennies. It really would have. Now, the problem was they tried to actually push this tax through. The Democrats tried to push this through, but it did get shot down. Sanders, Warren also tried to put in tax cuts against the rich. Unfortunately, they got shut down. No thanks to confused Democrat Joe Manchin and wants to be Republican so bad, Kristen Sinema. Two Senate Democrats actually prevented this measure from going through because the rich can pay more. They really, truly can. And the fact that now the next part is a legal precedent to try to get this through and to try to legalize this is the most scariest thing you can do if you are a lawmaker trying to get the rich to pay their fair share, which is why I tell everybody, you really need to be paying attention to Moore versus the United States. Because again, this is going to the Supreme Court. We already know the Supreme Court is with their conservative leaning because they've already gutted. If you think about it, they put down Roe versus Wade. They've gutted parts of affirmative action. which again was barely suited to hold minority and people of color. But apparently 4 Asian students thought it was a good idea to have that dismantled because they figured they were being disqualified from going to Harvard. Again, when you say it out loud, you know how stupid that sounds. But again, people don't realize by that part of affirmative action being taken down, it has led to diversity hires and a lot of corporations losing their jobs because corporations and companies have no longer fear of retaliation for letting these diversity hires go. So I keep bringing this up. For every time the Supreme Court has made a decision, people have suffered. And the fact of the matter is, now that you have a Supreme Court that could possibly make it harder for the rich to be taxed, if they decide to rule in favor of more, is a whole different story. But again, all I can sit there and say, guys, please be informed. Take this time now to actually go into it because these decisions here will definitely affect you. But speaking of things that'll be affecting you guys, Nikki Haley, that is not her real name. Presidential candidate hopeful who, as of right now, because the fourth debate for the Republican nomination is going on. It's on News Me if you want to watch it. Personally, I skipped it because there's only 4 candidates left. We went down to Vivek Rashevsky. We are down to Governor Chris. We are down to former Governor Chris Christie. We are down to Nikki Haley. And let's see. And we're down to failed debater, former dictator, Governor Ron DeSantis. Now, when I say failed debater, Ron DeSantis debating Gavin Newsom, governor of Florida, was like watching it. First of all, it was like watching someone who has never debated get beat by someone who's very well versed in it. I mean, Gavin Newsom really I'll give DeSantis credit. At least he showed up. But DeSantis pretty much got mollywopped and embarrassed because he is not a good debater. He could not present the facts, and Newsom just literally danced all over him during that entire debate. Now, if I was DeSantis's campaign manager, I would have never told him. It's like you ever see someone take a fight or take something they shouldn't take on? If somebody that you knew was a favorite, was a boxing fan, and Mike Tyson came out of retirement, and Mike Tyson gave them a fight and said, "I want to fight you, and you're the manager." Do you allow your boxer to take that fight knowing he is not on the same skill level as Mike Tyson, regardless of his age? No, you probably wouldn't. So in this case, DeSantis didn't have anybody in his corner talking and saying, you know what, maybe you shouldn't debate Gavin Newsom because you're not that good of a debater. Well, he wasn't. It was a beatdown. So imagine right now during the fourth debate for the Republican nomination, how that's going. I can only imagine. But again, these four individuals are still vying for second place. Recent polls still show that about to be in prison sometime, former failed president is leading those polls by double digits. A man who is facing over 100 convictions is still in line to possibly win the Republican nomination, although he has never been in any of them, because he simply said it best. Why do I need a debate? I'm leading the polls. It's hard to argue with the man. For once, he actually might be right about something. But getting back to what I said about Nikki Haley. Nikki Haley has done something that literally is so unconservative, but at the same time, this is why I keep saying, outside of the fact that she's a woman, and that's not being sexist, but that's being honest. The fact that she is a white woman trying to be a head of an old boys club, number one, is the reason why she'll never get the GOP nomination. But when you start saying stuff like this, you actually lose conservatives because conservatives don't understand the words reform.
See her rise. Chris Christie, there's New York Times reporting that some Republican big donors have a message for Chris Christie, which is get out, and they're throwing their money behind people like Nikki Haley. And part of what's interesting to them is that she's willing to talk about real entitlement reform on Social Security and Medicare. Listen to her.
The ones we change it for are those like my kids in their 20s coming into the system. We change retirement age to reflect life expectancy for them. We limit benefits on the wealthy. Instead of cost of living increases, we do increases based on inflation. And we expand Medicare Advantage plans, which seniors love, that allow competition and reduce the cost of healthcare.
Big money donors like Ken Langone here in New York, for example, saying, why do I need $3,500 a month? This has to change. What's the political calculus? Because that was sort of a third rail untouchable.
I think that Nikki Haley actually has the political nuance to be able to tackle something like entitlement reform and not fall into the trap that Democrats often set, which is you're taking away entitlements. She's talking about reforming it for the future generation. She's talking about its solvency.
Okay, so I'm just going to stop it right there because, again, this screen I want you to catch right here, and I just want to go over this. Nikki Haley wants to literally go over entitlement reform for Social Security and Medicare Advantage plans. This is something that GOP have always said, but in reverse. See, the GOP wants to gut Social Security. They want to privatize it. They actually want to gut Medicare and privatize it because there's money in both these plans. Social Security is one of the very few plans in our Congress that works flawlessly, as far as gathering income. She wants to raise the retirement age for Social Security benefits to basically match the longevity expectancy of life for the current generation. That right there is something that GOP loves to do. They love to raise the age because the farther they push it back, the chances are that folks who are in that Social Security age right now benefit more from younger generations. That is effing wrong. Because at the same time, guys, the retirement age, if you keep pushing back the retirement age, in theory, you would basically, especially if you're still working and you haven't reached said age, because again, they're pushing back the retirement age every chance they get. Imagine that you've been working all your life, but the retirement age is so far ahead of you that at the time you do need Social Security, you wouldn't be able to benefit from it. That's pretty much what the GOP wants to do. And again, limit growth benefits for wealthy recipients. This right here is a talking point that they always there and say, well, we want to limit the growth of benefits for wealthy recipients. If the recipients are working, then they're going to get what they want. They love to use the billion. They love to use billionaires. Well, I get $3,500 a month. Why do I need it? Because it's yours. That's why. There's nothing else beyond that. But they love to accentuate the fact that rich people are getting their benefits as if they don't deserve it. If they've paid into Social Security, you do deserve it. And finally, expand Medicare Advantage plans. Ladies and gentlemen, that right there is the most vaguest statement because, again, Republicans want to basically take out Medicare and Medicare Advantage. Medicare Advantage is just an extension of Medicare to where it includes other groups, those who are disabled, those with special needs, just to name a few, fall on those Medicare Advantage plans. Those with, again, special needs like autism, things of that nature. That's the reason why they're being able to get Medicare coverage. The fact that she wants to expand it is a vague statement because it's already expanded. Republicans actually want to limit those that could be on Medicare. And again, like Social Security, they want to turn around and extend the age limit because they want to put it out the hands of those who are still currently working, still feeding the systems, but at the same time, oh, well, when it's time for you to use it, at that point, it may not be there. You may not qualify. This is why I keep saying Nikki Haley will never be president. She never will be. Outside again, and this is just being honest, and I'm not trying to be sexist. I think a woman can be president. I would like to see a woman president. I really would, historically. But I would like to see a woman president that was qualified. And the last woman that did it, well, y'all voted Trump against her. That being said, Nikki Haley trying to go for the presidency, much like I said about Tim Scott trying to be president. If you think a black man running for the GOP nomination was a unicorn in itself, try a woman. Not because of the fact that she's a woman. The fact is Nikki Haley is simply unqualified. And the fact that she's not talking the normal Republican tones is the same reason why, above all else, she may not make it past this president. She may not make it past this debate. But again, what are your choices? Governor Christie, a man who pretty much stands on nothing. Vivek Ramaswamy, a man that basically lies about everything. And Governor Ron DeSantis, who outside of Florida has proven that he is basically Trump 2.0. And then you have Dorito, who, again, like I said, over 100 convictions. His court cases the majority of them will be starting in 2024. But one of those federal convictions could disqualify him from presidency. Those are your choices in the GOP. And again, you shouldn't be surprised by that. But Nikki Haley trying to go for entitlement reform this late in the stage is just another grab at trying to basically vie off a second, because that's all these Republicans debates are. None of these candidates have actually sat there and said that they're better than Trump when they're too busy chasing him. And it's hard to chase somebody who hasn't said one word outside of his political rallies where he's basically delivering all the hits. The Democrats want to condemn him because they know he'll win. That's the scary part. That's the one thing he hasn't told a lie about, that there is a chance that if he is allowed to basically make it all the way to the end unscathed and run for president and run for a nomination, he may actually get it again. And that alone is effing scary. But moving right along, guys, I've been talking about this as well, but leave it to Mark Cuban of Shark Tank to start scaring drug companies. What I mean by that is CVS has announced that they are changing the way they're pricing their prescription drugs. Now, this isn't because, and I say this, it doesn't say this in the article, but again, this is the Mark Cuban effect. Mark Cuban, if you guys haven't noticed, is starting his own drug prescription company where he is actually taking on the billion-dollar industry and the fact of how things are priced. Because of his company, because he's going from Shark Tank, because he is selling his majority stake in the Dallas Mavericks and moving forward in this venture, other companies saw this and went, oh shit, we probably need to change it. We probably need to change the way we do things. Hence the prices in prescription drugs. CVS has announced that they will not be using PBMs or pharmacy benefit managers no longer to actually negotiate drug prices. They said, and I wish I could make this up, and I want to get to where they pretty much sat there and said what we're doing. And like I said, the new approach that CVS is coin-titling is CVS Cost Advantage, which uses a simpler formula that includes the cost of that. That was a mouthful. Let me try this again. They're basically using a plan called Cost Advantage that will use a simple formula that includes the cost of the drug, a set markup, and a fee to determine the drug's price and reimbursement with pharmacy benefit managers, although this is expected to launch with payers in 2025. Now, you're probably wondering what that is. Pharmacy benefit managers, guys, are basically brokers. They actually do work with the drug companies and as well as the companies they represent. So you do have pharmacy benefit managers for CVS, for Walgreens, for all your major drug companies, Walmart, because Walmart has a pharmacy. So pretty much any major pharmacy probably has pharmacy benefit managers. That being said, they do go out to these drug companies and negotiate prices. Now, I've been saying this for the longest time, that the U.S. drug market is probably one of the most limited markets in the world. They can only do business with said companies in the U.S. and have limited business with those in Canada and Mexico. Overseas doesn't even match. Now, the one thing I've been saying that when it comes to cost of prescriptions are way too damn high, especially for prescriptions that are life-maintaining prescriptions. Insulin for diabetes, inhalers if you have asthma, heart medication for those that fit into that area, or just, I can keep going down the list. These are not just your over-the-counter medications. These are medications to maintain a quality of life that are astronomically high, even with insurance. And I've been saying for the entire time that, yes, that what needs to happen is that the cost of prescriptions are only this freaking high just because there's no competition. And now that Mark Cuban and his company have entered the drug market, now all of a sudden things want to change. I have been saying this since the beginning of this podcast, since we started covering drug costs, drug prescription costs, things of that nature. The fact that they basically made a profit in this market without competition, and now that there is competition, because I'm not expecting Congress anytime soon to actually do something about drug costs. We just now got to where insulin has a cap of $35. I think that for life-saving medication, it should be lower. Keep in mind, I'm saying life-saving and quality of life medications should be way lower. Nobody should have to pay $40 just to maintain quality of life. Nobody should have to decide between rent and getting things to keep you going. That should not be a decision for any American. But I love the fact that it took competition to get certain companies to shape up. Not because of the fact it's the right thing to do, because of the fact that people may switch and go to Mark Cuban's company and bankrupt It's not the fact of people's needs that is amazing to me that they're not following. It's the fact of, it's always been with business, the way of profit. But we'll cover that story because, like I said, Mark Cuban's dream is to shake up the pharmaceutical company. I can't wait to see what happens next, personally. But speaking of things that it amazed me before I get into this, because I wanted to bring this story up again, because here's the thing about the lower states. The lower states, as I said many times, has the Hold My Beer competition. And every week, it seems the championship for this title keeps switching states. My home state of Tennessee included, because in Tennessee, we're progressively backwards. But you guys remember the story that I brought up a few months ago, where this young man right here, his only crime was his hair. Now, as you can see there, the man has locks. The school tried to sit there and say that his locks, his hairstyle, have violated school terms to the point to where he was suspended. Of course, that his parents and the school board basically went head to head to the point to where they tried to move him to an alternative school, which after a while he was able to return back to school. He did not cut his hair, as rightfully should not, only to have the school turn around and suspend him again, even though the school rules, for those who are wondering, because you can't suspend someone for locks because of the Crown Act, right? Well, that's the problem. The southern states usually ignore federal overview. They always try to sit there and say, well, schools have this law that just supersedes federal law, which it doesn't. The school's terms on hair is that it has to be 7 inches above and it has to be above the ears. Now, for the thing, as you can see, guys, his hairstyle is literally braided back behind his ears, not resting on his neck, which by the school's bylaws means that he should be fined. But the fact that he again came back to school, did not cut his hair, the school itself decided that, you know what, you still haven't learned your lesson. And it amazes me so. We have a Crown Act. For all those that don't know, the Crown Act pretty much means that you cannot be discriminated based on a hairstyle that is commonly or historically associated with race. Locks. Again, I know my hair is messed up, but work with me on this. Locks themselves, you can have locks and still be professional. You can still have locks, still go to school. You can still have locks and be clean. The fact that when it comes to locks, they seem to have this stereotype, or in my personal opinion, because they can't do the same hairstyles we can do, is the reason why schools, especially in the South, want to discriminate against this. And again, why? The boy's only disruption, they always say the only boy's disruption is his hair. It's hair that you don't like. But again, that's the reason why the Crown Act is so important. It's the reason why, we don't have to, for as people of color, we don't have to sit there and, if you want to go clean cut, go clean cut. If you want bald head, go bald. If you want braids, do that. Because that's what they're accepting. They hate the fact that they see locks. They hate the fact that they see our hairstyle. They hate the fact that they actually see a lot of things they can't do. So they have to limit it because they want us to conform. That's all it is. And the Crown Act just pretty much says, you know what? You're not going to get discriminated for this. You're not going to be held back for this. But it's a long-standing battle with the parents and the parents taking on the school. I worry that it affects the child's education. That's just my thing, because he was sent to alternative school for no reason. And alternative school is basically a school when you've messed up that far. That young man did not. But we will follow that story as it goes along, because the simple fact of the matter, guys, he's only being discriminated because he won't cut his hair. Why does that sound familiar, especially when it comes to white people telling black people what to do about stuff that they have that they can't do? But I digress. Moving along, guys, I wanted to cover this story as well, just because I'm not in New York. I have a friend of mine who's also a partner with me on another podcast. So shout out to Kira, Room Full of Birds, if you're watching. I had to run this story by her because she lives in New York. I had to ask if this was true. And again, I have to ask this question of how much does it come? Because New York is investing in a congestion price plan. And again, it's one of those things that you just need to hear it first before I can explain it.
Walk the streets of Manhattan, and you may soon see hundreds of new cameras covering every lane headed downtown. They're charging a new toll on congestion.
We are going to be the very first state in the nation, the very first city in America to have a congestion pricing plan.
The new toll covers much of lower Manhattan Entering this zone in a car could cost up to $23 a day.
It's going to be an example for cities all over the country to rethink how they use their street space.
But a plan of this scale will affect millions of people every day. Not everyone is a fan.
Most people are only focused on the fact that they are going to have to pay $23 to get into Manhattan. Pocketbook issues always take priority over the environmental issues or anything else that's related to the problem.
The MTA will use its share of project revenues to secure $15 billion in financing for system maintenance and capital investment.
You know, the public transit system that millions of New Yorkers rely on every single day has been disinvested in almost from day one. Many parts of the system have suffered basically a century of deferred maintenance.
You know, over the last 70 years, the federal government is focusing almost exclusively on investing in our roads, infrastructure, the interstate highway system. We're not going to undo 70 years of policy.
Can higher tolls for drivers fix traffic in Manhattan? And will they make New York even less affordable? Manhattan's new toll zone covers all of the routes into the central business district. Some routes into the area already get tolled. The fees can be over $14 per crossing. Others are free until the program begins in the spring of 2024.
And so that discourages people from really driving out of their way for the cheapest route. And right now, tons of people do that.
The final price of the fee isn't set yet, but the city is working within a range.
The range that is being considered is between $9 and $23. If it's $23, it means there's lots of exemptions.
I mean, you got to put something into the system to get something back. Everything is increased in New York, but the pay. So people are struggling trying to figure out where this money's coming from.
If you're a resident of the CBD and you make under $60,000 a year, you'll get a subsidy. People with disabilities won't pay. You know, there's an adjustment, you know, taking a look at what really is happening in the city today.
The MTA received thousands of requests for exemptions from the toll, including from artists, students, civil servants, NYPD, and trade unions. There's no guarantee these requests will be granted.
If you're a low-income driver and you're on the outer fringes of the outer boroughs, how do you get to the city if you're not going to drive anymore? You're going to put another perhaps 2 hours on that commute.
It's not popular to tax ourselves. And when there are many layers of decision making in order to tax ourselves, that's many layers of opportunity for someone to say, hey, no, let's not do this.
The money raised from this zone may bring billions of new dollars worth of investment into an aging MTA system.
It's a massive system that has been underinvested for decades.
It's a very old system, in some cases over 100 years old. And so it really requires a lot of investment just to keep what we have operating.
80% of the cash raised from this toll goes toward the city's subways and buses.
Signals is actually one of the biggest investments we can make to ensure that we can run more trains more quickly.
10% goes to the Long Island Railroad, and the final 10% to the Metro North.
I think we've been very thoughtful about where those investments will occur.
MTA is building 4 new Metro North stations in the Bronx that will allow people to access Metro North more easily.
It's going to save people tons of time. New York has the most riders and the slowest buses, and it's a huge shame.
Customers say they would be encouraged to ride more often if wait times improved, and if there were fewer people behaving erratically on trains, according to an MTA survey.
Our customers are saying, we want faster service, we want more reliable service. You know, we have signals that were installed literally in the 1950s that are still sort of, you know, working, thank goodness, but that won't be forever. It requires investment.
Still, the new toll doesn't cover all of the MTA's needs. Officials say the system needs about $54 billion for new capital assets. That includes track upgrades, repairs to elevated structures, and replacing power equipment. Revenues from the toll will also be put towards cleaner transit.
And with the largest bus fleet in America, that's a big deal. We're also piloting hydrogen. So we have a couple of buses that will be powered by hydrogen that'll be on property in 2025.
The MTA is using the funds from congestion pricing to improve its bus network. Its hydrogen bus pilot will be small, with just 2 buses beginning by the end of 2024. The agency has big goals, though. It wants to make its entire bus fleet emissions-free by 2040.
That's going to help reduce the amount of pollution associated with buses themselves.
The region would not exist in the way it does without our transit system. It allows us to be a very efficient place when it comes to greenhouse gas emissions because so many people are on public transit.
Bumper-to-bumper traffic is an environmental issue, too.
We know that idling is one of the biggest causes of air pollution, which contribute to significant air qualities and smog. When cars are stopped, they are accumulating more of that rather than when they're moving along.
The toll will improve air quality in many parts of the region, according to traffic simulations. But areas like Fort Lee, New Jersey, and the Bronx could become busier with congestion pricing in place. The red spots on this map show where planners expect more traffic when the toll is live. Roads like the Cross Bronx Expressway may have to handle even more vehicles.
A lot of the trucks traveling up and down the East Coast end up using that highway. That community, it was torn apart by the creation of the Cross Bronx Expressway. There's a real historical inequity that's sort of built into that piece of transportation infrastructure that needs to be addressed.
Okay, I gotta stop right there, guys, because again, it's a very long video, but I wanted to catch that part. But let's think about this for a second. They're basically saying, and again, I check with a New Yorker, check with a friend of mine, and make sure this is right. And unfortunately, it is right. It is basically congestion price. It's a basic congestion price plan, which again, they're trying to say that as New Yorkers, their new governor is moving forward with this plan, saying it's going to be great. But let's think about this for a second. It's depending on what you do, because the price plan to drive into this section of New York at $24 a day. That's for a light truck. Bigger trucks can go up to 30s. But the fact that all this is going to be added, and not just vehicles. Think about this. It is going to be higher bus fare. It is going to be higher Uber rates. It is going to be however you travel, outside of taking the two-shoe express, walking to where you're going to. All I can think of is that why are you taxing New Yorkers more, but you're selling the dream of, hey, at the end of it all, we're going to have a new transit system. We're going to have new buses, new routes. But you're asking New Yorkers, from my understanding, I've never lived in New York. I visit New York, but I don't live in New York. I understand it's very costly. I understand it's very costly for a place to stay, to eat. I cannot imagine having a vehicle driving around, because I can only imagine parking in New York. I can only imagine paying the tolls whenever you're going from the boroughs, or whenever you're going to New Jersey or things of that nature. That's a toll system up north. I know that for a fact. But that being said, if you do work in that area, imagine going to Lower Manhattan and that you have to pay a fee on a daily basis. Well, it's $9. Okay, well, after 1 week, that's $45. $45 a week. That means $45 a week. After 4 weeks, that adds up, even at the $9 range. We're not even talking the $24 range, because all that's got to add up. And the fact that you're putting that on the everyday New Yorker, where it's just like, especially if your income is not that well, that could hinder you from working a job if you live in that area. That could hinder you if you're working Uber Eats or DoorDash. All those fees are going to add up. And I've never understood why tax an already high tax bracket area like New York and expect citizens to agree. I'm still surprised the plan went through personally. I'm surprised that more New Yorkers didn't protest this, or I can only assume that they didn't, behind closed doors, this was approved and passed before New Yorkers could have their head spin. But you guys tell me, for all those that are in New York or live in these transit areas where they do charge you for toll roads, things of that nature, because I feel like states that have tolls, states that have these types of things, this is only stage one. I think other states that have tolls and bridges that people pay to cross them every day, I think they're going to look at New York and they're going to sit there and say, well, if one of the biggest cities in the world can do it, why not us? And that to me is a scary thing, to continually tax citizens because you can actually tax them out. You can tax them right out of their livelihoods and into poverty. So again, I asked the governor, I asked those that think this is a great plan. Yes, in theory it is, but you're also basing this off the fact that people can spend an extra $9 to $24 a day, depending on their job, to go to Lower Manhattan. Because right now it's just Lower Manhattan. I don't even want to imagine if it's citywide, but we'll follow that story as it goes along. Moving on, guys. Another senator that literally should be resigned by now. Failed college coach, Senator Tommy Tuberville, has finally decided that he is going to end his holdout on military promotions. Over nearly 350 military nominations he's allowed to go through, except for about 40, because he believes that you can fight for our country all you want, but no, you can't have abortions.
Tommy Tuberville of Alabama is signaling that he may be ready to end his 10-month block on military promotions. ABC's Jay O'Brien joins us now from Capitol Hill with more on that. Jay, good morning.
We had a lot of anticipation here on Capitol Hill this morning that Senator Tommy Tuberville's controversial blockade of more than 350 military nominations could come to an end in the coming days. The Department of Defense saying that these holdups are leaving key command positions vacant or with interim leaders. And in a time with conflicts in the Middle East and in Ukraine, it's posing a serious national security risk, they say. Tuberville holding up these nominations over objections to the Pentagon's abortion policy. And after 10 months of holding his ground, the Alabama senator acknowledging to reporters last week that these nominees, quote, need to be promoted and, quote, have not done anything wrong. The former college football coach turned senator has been roundly criticized by Democrats and even some Republican colleagues in his own party for holding up these nominations. He's now saying that he's working with a bipartisan group of lawmakers to get as many promotions voted on as soon as possible, but it's unclear with exactly how many he'll let be confirmed with.
All right, we'll be watching that in.
So think about this for a second. A man that literally held a one idiot crusade because 350 military nominations, including one that would have had a black man as the first commander of as the first person of color for the U.S. Air Force. He held that up. Only now he's like, oh, let's hurry up and get these military nominations in. Why the change? Why the change of heart, sir? Because you were on this abortion right to protect life stance for the longest thing, except for 4-star generals, which again, I said before, that African American I'm talking about that was going to be nominated to be commander of the U.S. Air Forces, a black man, one of those 4-star generals. And he wants to actually hold that position up. Of those 4-star generals, he wants to hold that position up because he still believes that the U.S. Armed Forces does not need abortions. That's his reasoning. And again, Republicans, explain it the best way you can, because it's going to be a little hard to do that. And also, if I was in his district and I was voting for him, I would bring that up every chance I got. Because how in the blue hell can you sit there and literally and figuratively act like nothing, like you weren't the problem? I was like, oh, we need to hurry up because this should never happen. It happened because of you. And now you're trying to push things through, but you're still holding back generals because you still feel like you can win this battle. Only in a Republican mindset can they be a blockade for something because they think they're doing something righteous. But speaking of things that are righteous, Elon Musk is in trouble. Why? Because, well, Elon Musk is outside of pretty much turning Twitter into the dark space. That's what we call it. Or I should say X now. He hasn't been in trouble because, one, he decided to agree to a tweet that he probably should have kept his mouth shut on.
Musk, he unloaded on advertisers, including our parent company Disney, who left his social media company X after Musk endorsed an anti-Semitic conspiracy theory in a post. Aaron Kotoshi's back here with that story. Good morning, Aaron.
George, good morning. Elon Musk apologized for that anti-Semitic post, but he quickly lashed out at advertisers that have pulled out from X.
I did clarify almost immediately what I meant.
This morning, Elon Musk's regret at the annual New York Times DealBook Summit. He said he should not have responded to a post on his social media network X that spouted an anti-Semitic conspiracy theory.
You know, if I could go back and say I should, in retrospect, not have replied to that particular person, and I should have written in greater length as to what I meant.
Musk then apologized.
Essentially, I handed a loaded gun to those who hate me, and arguably to those who are anti-Semitic. And for that, I'm quite sorry. That was not my intention.
Musk wrote, "You have said the actual truth," after a user posted that, quote, Jewish communities have been pushing the exact kind of dialectical hatred against whites that they claim to want people to stop using against them. Advertisers bolted. Big companies like IBM, Apple, and ABC News parent Disney pulled their advertising from X, Musk using an expletive to describe what he called blackmail, including criticizing Disney CEO Bob Iger, who attended the same summit.
Don't advertise.
You don't want them to advertise?
No.
Sitting in the audience, the new chief executive of X. Musk's latest remarks complicate her job of convincing advertisers to return.
The thing that everyone will remember from today is Elon Musk telling advertisers who have left the platform, left X, to do a profane act to themselves. You know, he has insulted them, and he's telling them that they've ruined the company by no longer advertising on the platform.
Musk conceded an advertiser boycott would ruin X. But if that happens, Musk insisted the world would believe advertisers killed the platform, not his own behavior and words, guys.
Of course he wouldn't believe it, because it's not like he's never made a mistake before. It's not like he hasn't sat there and said, well, it's not like it's my fault. I just agreed to a tweet that said that a certain group of individuals may or may not have influenced a group of people to go any direction that said group of people want other people to do. And the reason why I gotta say that, guys, is because the last time I actually talked about something in that case, the Zuckerbots and Facebook decided, oh, you're probably you're inciting war, you're inciting riots, which I'm not. So I say it like that because, again, Elon Musk is one of those guys, which again believes that they believe this whole thing of free speech. I should be able to say anything I want. Well, you can. You just can't say it without consequence. Like, for example, if you like something, remember Kyrie Irving? Kyrie Irving, all he did was like a book that was controversial in itself. And the fact that he still, instead of him sitting there saying, this is just my beliefs, you can believe what you want to, he doubled down to the point to where his livelihood was really almost taken away from him. Now, again, I use that as an example. Elon Musk liked something and then said, you told the truth, to a very controversial tweet. Not realizing that, hey, when you like controversy, controversy does not always equal cash. Controversy could lead to you getting canceled. And especially on the fact of when you're dealing with a group of people whose influence is everywhere. What do you expect? IBM, Disney, pulling their ads from you. These are media and conglomerate giants that are pulling their ads, which Twitter or X, however you decide to label it, have enjoyed it immensely. And now without that profit, yes, X could go under. And that $44 billion that Elon Musk paid to acquire Twitter and turn it into X may go out the window. But he would only have himself to blame. This just goes to show you in Business 101, ladies and gentlemen, that when it comes to certain items, 'tis best to keep it to yourself versus your livelihood. And I'm not surprised about Elon Musk because, well, in my mind, he's a jackass. But move right along, guys, because we do got a few more stories before we get to our feel-good segment. The NCAA, I know, has been talked about a lot, especially with the championship series. However, the NCAA seems to be moving forward in how student athletes get paid outside of NIL deals.
Tonight, a bold idea from the NCAA president, proposing for the first time ever, schools be allowed to pay student athletes. The potential shift could impact a policy passed 2 years ago that allowed players to earn money through endorsements outside of school. NCAA President Charlie Baker now wants to allow schools to take part. In a letter to more than 350 Division I schools, Baker called for an entirely new athletic division to be created. Participating schools would invest at least $30,000 for each qualifying athlete, male or female, annually, and work with the NCAA to craft different rules for the new division. Baker noting 59 schools already spend more than $100 million annually on athletic programs. Schools already responding.
I think it's going to be really good for college athletics, and we're excited to be a part of it.
Let's finally figure out the best way to move forward
in a way that takes care of our student athletes very well, allows us to be competitive across our conferences.
Do you see this potentially leveling the playing field?
Not particularly. College sports has never had a level playing field. If a school wants to spend a lot more money on football players and offer them a lot more, they can do that as long as they spend an equal amount of money for female athletes on the other side of that as well.
A long-standing playbook on its way to changing. Morgan Chesky, NBC News.
And I'm not against that. I actually think that's a great idea because ever since NIL deals got introduced, that already off the bat, once you introduce the fact that college athletes can be paid, which is it's a long-standing argument. It really is. Oh, well, if college athletes are getting paid, that means that destroys the purity of college sports. First off, there's no such thing as purity in college sports. I'm just going to be honest about that. But the fact that schools and coaches have made billions off the backs of multiple student athletes, that yes, the fact that they can now be paid, and the simple fact there should be a division. And there's nothing wrong with that. You can have a division that's over the fact of how student athletes can be paid. There needs to be a regulating body. I will not argue that. But at the same time, it doesn't take away from the fact these NIL deals could mean that a lot of these student athletes could be making multi-million dollars long before they go pro. But having a governing body, not a bad thing. We just need another we just need another NCAA. That's all I'm saying. That it should be for the benefit of these student athletes who put their bodies on the line. But I digress. Moving right along, guys, we do have a couple of stories that I'm just going to be honest with you guys. These videos are going to be definitely graphic and triggering, so viewer discretion is advised, especially the first story, where, again, I talk about the police all the time. If you haven't noticed me, hi, my name's Will. How the Frack we got here. On here, we say F the police. The reason being because as much as law enforcement tries to sit there and say, well, this is just a few bad apples, a few bad actors, explain a student resource officer that basically does this to an 8-year-old and then tries to justify it. Again, viewer discretion is advised.
The first 4 minutes of this video starts off quiet. There's no sound for the moments before an incident at the center of a federal lawsuit. 9 News obtained body camera video of what happened at an elementary school in Cheyenne, Wyoming last year. The complaint says a school resource officer physically assaulted this 8-year-old boy with a neurodivergent disability. He's talking to his principal at the table. That's all you can see. And what happens next is difficult to watch. There's a very sharp edit cut in the video. The child is screaming on the ground with the school resource officer on top of him.
You cross your legs right now.
We don't know how this happened or why. The lawsuit claims the SRO deleted portions of his body camera video in an effort to conceal his wrongdoing.
Let go. No, you don't get to win this now. It's all me. Do you understand me?
Before this happens, the complaint says the principal and a teacher were talking to the boy about his behavior at lunch. They didn't ask the SRO for help, but when the child tried to walk away, the lawsuit says the SRO grabbed the boy's arm, took him into a conference room, and slammed his face onto the floor. After this happens, the boy's father comes to the school.
So I don't understand why you're putting your hands on him if you will be hurting anyone.
Because as a law enforcement officer, that's my primary function.
As the student seems to try to catch his breath, the SRO tells the dad he put the boy on the ground after he kicked a chair and fought back.
And he also got a bloody nose. He tried biting my hand, and then I put his face on, face down on the ground.
The lawsuit says the SRO violated school policies, and the boy didn't do anything wrong that required use of force.
Fight me again. Fight me again.
And like I said, guys, this first one's going to be graphic. But yes, a student resource officer decided that an 8-year-old needed to be put on his stomach, face down, and restrained. An 8-year-old. Sir, you are a grown-ass man. And I say this all the time when it comes to student resource officers. You get these law enforcement officers that don't get the proper training, that believe that intimidation and force is what's going to make a child or a student act the way or getting them to comply. That's law enforcement since the 60s. That officer did not have training with child development. Because that's my thing. If you're going to be a school resource officer, which SROs they call them, SROs should be given additional training, especially dealing with children, especially those that have learned dealing with children that have disabilities, learning child development classes they need to attend to. They need to basically learn negotiation, de-escalation tactics, these things that a school resource officer should be applying outside of handcuffs and non-lethal tactics. But again, sir, you are a grown-ass man, basically putting down an 8-year-old, and then okay, here's my thing. I know as a parent, and I've said this to colleagues as well as a new parent, I cannot imagine anybody manhandling my child that way, and I'm calm. Understand that your child, if your 8-year-old son came back and you found out that someone manhandled your 8-year-old son and they're in the same room with you, calm is not the demeanor I'm going to display. Officer or not, I would be ready to lay hands. You lay hands on my son, I'm gonna lay hands on you. And then he tries to sit there and say, well, he was biting me, he was scratching at me. Gee, I wonder why. But the tip of the iceberg is that the school resource officer decided to delete his own body cam footage. Now, sir, why would you delete your own body cam footage if it's supposed to be there to protect you and the assailant? The assailant, in his eyes, is an 8-year-old boy. This is why I keep saying about law enforcement, guys, that they should not have the ability to alter their own body cameras. I believe, and I said this before, I believe that there should be laws and regulations allowed to body cameras. Number one, if an officer turns off his body camera, that means anything that happened that he is a part of is null and void. It's as they call them, as they sit there and say in the words of the court, it's through the poisonous tree. Anything that happens at that point is null and void and cannot be used in court. That's just me. If they decide to alter the body cameras, that to me is a crime. It's a crime that you basically try to manipulate evidence to prove a point. Again, you should be held to the full count of the law. If officers step outside the law, they need to be reprimanded, school resource officer level or not. But again, training is a big thing with law enforcement that needs to happen. And again, if you are a school resource officer, there should be additional training you should be given. But as of right now, that individual is on administrative leave. But in my mind, if you can't even handle an 8-year-old, I hate to see what you do with another grown man. But hopefully he's fired. But we'll cover that story as it goes along. The other story of law enforcement I have, guys, is again another graphic video. It's a trigger warning, and I have to say this again: viewer discretion is advised.
They held a protest Monday night in response to the viral video showing a police officer using a stun gun on a handcuffed man. We want to warn you, you might find this video disturbing. After an exchange of words, the police officer pulls the trigger on the stun gun and then asks, "You want it again? No, man. Shut the f up, you was big and bad." She could then be heard calling him an explicit name.
She tased him in the back, and she was holding it. She was just holding it there until he started crying.
Jalexis Rice, girlfriend of Micaiah Washington, says this all started when her boyfriend and 2 others were changing a tire of the car they were driving. She says that's when the officer in the video pulled up, eventually putting her boyfriend in handcuffs and tasing him.
When I seen it, I couldn't do nothing but cry. I couldn't do nothing but cry.
Following his arrest, Washington was booked into the Pickens County Jail on several charges. He has a bond of $500,000. In a statement, Reform's police chief and mayor said they're aware of the video and the police officer has been placed on administrative leave. However, people attending Monday's rally say they want more done.
She needs to be fired, and I feel like she can leave and go somewhere else and do it if they don't hold her accountable for nothing. You are police. You're here to protect and serve us. How do we supposed to trust you and this how you treat us?
It hurt my feelings for real.
In the statement from the mayor and police chief, they said in part, the department is in the process of turning over all materials related to this arrest to the Alabama State Bureau of Investigation and has requested a thorough investigation into the circumstances surrounding the arrest.
So again, with that story, guys, I have to ask questions. The reason why I have to ask questions is because, number one, the man's already handcuffed. He's on the hood of your car. What more could he possibly do to where you need to put a stun gun on him? So you guys, well, he was resisting arrest. Of how? from what they've released so far, and I say from what they released so far, that apparently this young man was changing a tire along with his confidant. Police came up. Next thing you know, he's being arrested. Now, why is that? Because even if you look at the charges, and I just want to bring this up very quickly, even if you look at the charges, obstructing government operations, which is kind of a really weak sauce kind of arrest, resisting arrest, don't see how, because well, he was literally handcuffed and he was being tasered. Marijuana possession, really, ex-felon in possession of a firearm, and drug trafficking. Now, that's a lot. The last three, especially the last two, drug trafficking, you got all that from stopping from checking on two individuals that were changing a tire. Really? Even more so, I still want them really and truly, because when you see it, there's something about the fact of when you see an image like this, and I want to get back to it as much as I can. When you see an image like this, I mean, explain that. Explain the fact that he's handcuffed. Explain the fact that you still have a taser. Explain the fact that you are forcing him into an uncomfortable position on the edge of your squad car. And still feel the need to be like, you was talking big and bad and all that shit. Unprofessional as hell. At the same time, that individual, they call themselves handling the criminal, but at the same time, who's really the criminal here? Who really is outside of law enforcement? Because it's amazing how they said, number one, didn't release the officer's name. I'm sorry. Why? Oh, that's right, protection, because you don't want everybody out there. And again, this is where police do this so well. Police do this so well. They will protect their own before they protect the person they're trying to arrest. The person who's arrested, his name's out there for the world to see. Internet, do your thing. Because I guarantee someone's going to look at that video and go, I know exactly who that is. But yet the Alabama Police Department refuses to give the name of said law enforcement officer. Why? It's not like she'll be retaliated, but we need to put a name along with the person that did the act. The fact that you hide it makes no sense, because they'll sit there and say, well, it's out of protection for the law enforcement officer. Really? So you'll protect officers after their actions, because let's be honest, most law enforcement try to explain the actions of their officers anyway. I still want to know why the extra need for retaliated force, why the need for a stun gun, why the need to do all these things, and yet now we have to wait for a higher level of law enforcement to investigate the Alabama State Police Department. I just have one question: what happens when it finds out that the officer was wrong? Are we going to get this officer to be blackballed? Are we going to get this officer to make sure that they are disqualified, which means that they cannot be a law enforcement officer in any other city or state? Are we going to do justice as far as what this one law enforcement did to this man, which is basically demasculate him and humiliate him with a body cam on? And for what? Drug trafficking, possession of a firearm by an ex-felon having possession of a firearm. They're going to have to explain this. But watch how quickly the wheels of justice move slow when it comes to law enforcement. But when it's us, fast food speed. I wish I could make this up. The final law enforcement story that I got, guys, again, this is disheartening, because after George Floyd, there was 17 counts of police officers using overexerted force on individuals. This one district alone, this DA decided that several of them need to be dropped. Again, I wish I could make this up.
17 Austin police officers tied to these 2020 protests. Protesters were injured by less lethal police ammunition, such as beanbag rounds, as they protested the deaths of George Floyd and locally Michael Ramos.
Austin lacks at least 350 police officers currently. The 17 who are indicted coming back is going to make a huge difference.
4 officers still face charges, but the Austin Justice Coalition's policy director says this move is unjust for the victims.
There may never be accountability for the harms that they suffered.
As a part of the announcement, the city of Austin and the district attorney said they jointly asked the Department of Justice to review Austin's handling of the protests.
That's a request, not a guarantee. The DOJ did not respond to our request asking if they intend to do that.
But I definitely welcome it with open arms, knowing that we need to ensure that we have the highest level of transparency in the city of Austin, and we ensure that the mistakes of 2020 are never repeated again.
I think it's political theater. To hide for the failures that our local institutions have had in holding police accountable.
The city of Austin has so far paid more than $20 million in civil lawsuits tied to those protests. There are still 8 pending.
That's a lot of dollars, taxpayer dollars.
Grace Reader, KXAN News.
Crazy, isn't it? That when it comes down to it, that they will literally drop 17 officers. They will drop indictments against 17 officers because they were basically fighting protests. I wonder why. Whenever it comes to law enforcement, please explain to me why, because I'm having a hard time with it. I really, really am. Because the simple fact of the matter, guys, you're not going to sit there and tell me that this is a thing. But I'll say it once, I'll say it again before we move on. There is a way to curb all this. And I give Killer Mike credit for this because he said it best. If you want to stop police brutality, if you want to stop unnecessary arrests and excessive use of force, there's one way to stop it. Tie paying out compensation to the police to the police pension. Take the law enforcement pension and tie that to compensation of victims and victims' families. If you do that, everything changes. You'll see a drop in shootings. You'll see a drop in excessive arrests. You'll see a drop in seeing viral videos of Black men being humiliated and emasculated by police. Why? Because at the end, if they wind up paying, it comes out of the police pension fund. And the last thing a law enforcement officer wants to see is their life savings go out the window because of another idiot. But I digress. Anyway, that's going to do it, guys. We're going to move on to our feel-good segment because you don't know how the frack we got here. We usually cover a lot of things that are doom and gloom. Sometimes it makes me use of faith in humanity. But hey, it is Wednesday, hump day. Tomorrow is Friday Eve, which is Thursday. We want to leave you guys out with some good vibrations. And hopefully the next story will do that. You know, we've been covering a lot of wedding proposals lately. And this one, I got to post this one because it took her a while to catch on to this. But this is funny as hell. Check it out. Did she say yes? That's the question I got. I mean, she was doing a lot of dancing and stuff around. I'm like, woman, I got a sign. Woman, could you read the sign? But again, funny as hell. I don't know if she said yes or not because that video cut way off. So it kind of gets awkward if she doesn't say anything or she says no. So we're going to hope God got a yes. If so, good luck to you. But that being said, guys, that's going to do it for this podcast. I do thank you all for watching, for liking, for letting people know. I certainly appreciate it from the bottom of my heart. Some shameless plugging before we do get out of here. I do have to subscribe to my boy Vaughn at Big VZA Dot. You can find him, Big VZA Dot, on all social media for beats, for shows, for songs, things of that nature. Reach out to him at Big VZA Dot for all those needs. Outside of that, guys, I do also want to shout out, of course, all my podcast brethren. It's a long list, but I'll try my hardest. Safari TV, Blurred's Eye View, Roomful of Blurs, Mayhem Media, Geek by Heart. Please check all of them out, especially Blurred's Eye View, as it will be back on Thursday night, as I usually am a part of that, along with a great group of individuals. Aside from that, the link at the bottom, guys. Let me make that a wee bit bigger for you guys to see. If you copy and paste that link into your browser, we'll take you to my link tree. That's YouTube and Facebook groups for all of my podcasts. How the Frack got here, Get Bitten, Off Limits podcast. Like, share, subscribe. Don't just simply like and walk off. Please like, share, tell people about it. The reason being because word of mouth is the biggest form of advertisement. It's how we beat the algorithm. So again, let people know, share it, because yes, I do news, but I do news for a purpose. It's to inform. It's to get you to be informed. It's to get you to get out there and be active in your communities. And again, if you don't know, you definitely don't want to be surprised. That is all I'm freaking saying. And of course, my social, BlackFox447, is probably pretty much anywhere. You can definitely like and follow me, as I do many of reviews and things of that nature. And again, always keep up with the news. But there is one last thing I do want to talk about, because again, it's one of those, it is to me one of those things where it's the new wave. Of course, you guys have known Netflix, Amazon Prime, Hulu. We know about the streaming services. We know that content gets removed and re-added on a daily basis. However, as of late, we are seeing prices increases, and you're probably wondering what's the point. Ever wanted something that was for us, by us, for us to enjoy? I'm talking people of color, blurs, things of that nature. We finally do have that now at a spot called blurredstation.com. Blurredstation.com has media, not just movies, not just television, not just shows like Issue 1 or Undead Horizon, not even artwork that is still coming out. As you can see right there, Blood Emblem is just one of those. It is the new wave. And that being said, it is the part where I'm part of a conglomerate that actually is with this one. So guys, if you just do a favor, definitely go to blurredstation.com, check us out. If you want to join, click on the join now button. It will take you to this page of membership subscriptions. Of course, you can subscribe to any one of those there, but if you truly want to help a brother out, definitely go to Blurred's View Affinity membership. And again, any influence partner that you select there, whether it's Chris Fury, Roomful of Blurs, myself will be watching, myself at Black Spartan, Safari TV, Navy Montel, or Geek by Heart. Select any one of those guys, and then of course select the Affinity membership. Whereas you can see right there, it's $10.99. $10.99. Think about this: $10.99 a month, and you still have money to eat. That's a beautiful thing, isn't it? You're probably wondering about the Affinity membership. What that basically means, guys, is that if you pay $10.99 a month for 36 months, that means at the end of that completion, you can own a piece of Blurred Station. Yes, you can own a piece of a media powerhouse known as Blurred Station. You know what you have to do to do that, to get to Amazon Prime or Netflix or Hulu, to get a piece of them. You have to go to a site like E-Trade or Fidelity Investments, or luck out on other sites like Cash App that give away free stocks, or you have to pay a buttload of money to get one share. Whereas at a Blurred Station, you just pay $10.99 a month for 36 months and get a chance to own a piece of Blurred Station. This is the new wave, folks. I'm just saying, because we need to start supporting these outgoings. Also, again, support small businesses, support those, especially especially considering the fact we are getting closer and closer to the Christmas shopping season. It's ramping up as it is. Support small business, support your local areas. Again, support those that are simply trying to, like me, doing a podcast or doing a show, doing something different. Support them the same way you would support Beyonce if she knew you were alive. That's all I'm saying. That also being said, guys, I keep saying this with every political season. Next year is the presidential race. We find out who is if Biden's going to get a second term, or we're going to see the second coming of President Dorito, or we might see a different president altogether. The thing I'm going to say, guys, is about this: please, oh please, get informed. Get out there, get to know your candidates, get to see if they match your views. Be aware of what they're wanting to do, because it does affect us all. And never forget to vote. I know it's corny as hell, but don't forget to vote. It's just that simple. We need that. We need to have that political action. We need to be active, because if it wasn't for the fact that they are trying to move the goalposts, if it wasn't the fact they're trying to redistrict some areas, if it wasn't for the fact they're making it harder for you to vote, that tells you something. Because ask the state of Georgia. The state of Georgia had a special election ceremony to where it elected its first Black U.S. senator, and actually turned Georgia blue for the first time in its history of its induction in the United States. Again, voting is crucial. Voting matters, not just at the federal level, but at the local level as well. And again, if you feel like you can run, there's plenty of sites that can show you how to run for office if you choose to. But simply put, be informed, be active. If that happens, then my purpose with this show has been fulfilled. But The last thing I'll say about how the Frack got here, it's all about staying informed. We are not trying to reinvent the wheel, people. We are simply giving you all the information you'd like to make up your own mind, but we do provide a logical perspective that goes along with it. We are progressive. We are progressive, meaning that we try to right the wrongs of our past by making decisions now that we should have done back then, like electing our first Black woman Supreme Court, electing our first Black woman to the Federal Board of Governors, electing our first Black woman to be a national cybersecurity director, and hopefully very soon, if Tommy Tuberville stops bullshitting, we could have our first 4-star Black general of the U.S. Air Force. All great things. We don't learn from history. We are doomed to repeat it. That's why we keep asking ourselves, why does everything go about our paycheck? Why are we electing different politicians but still the same old game in Congress? And most importantly, how the Frack we got here. Thank you all for watching, guys. Again, continue the conversation. Let me know what you think. Aside from that, take care of yourselves and each other, and we'll get through this. Peace.